The morning sunlight filtered through the ponderosa pines of Gerhard Mountain on May 5, 1945. Reverend Archie Mitchell watched his pregnant wife Elsie and 5 Sunday school children head toward Leonard Creek, their laughter echoing through the Oregon forest. It was supposed to be a perfect spring picnic. Then someone shouted, "Look what I found!" The explosion tore through the peaceful morning. In an instant, 6 lives ended on American soil, the only civilians killed by enemy action in the continental United States during World War II. But this wasn't a bomber. No plane had crossed the sky. The weapon that killed them had traveled 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean in 3 days, carried by invisible rivers of wind that even American scientists didn't fully understand. It was a paper balloon filled with hydrogen, launched from a beach in Japan months earlier, one of 9,300 silent weapons that crossed an ocean without a pilot, without fuel, without anyone noticing until it was too late. This is the story of Fugo, Japan's secret balloon bomb campaign that turned the jet stream into a weapon. If this hidden chapter of World War II interests you, subscribe and tell us in the comments what forgotten stories you want to hear next. The weapon was born from humiliation. April 18, 1942. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's B-25 bombers roared over Tokyo in broad daylight, dropping bombs on the Japanese capital. The raid caused minimal physical damage, but the psychological wound cut deep. Japan's home islands, supposedly invincible, had been violated by American aircraft. The military establishment demanded retaliation. The challenge impossible impossible. How could Japan strike the American mainland when it was 6,000 miles away across the world's largest ocean? Conventional aircraft didn't have the range. Submarines couldn't carry enough bombs. But buried in the archives of the Central Meteorological Observatory in Tokyo lay research that would change everything. In the 1920s, meteorologist Wasaburo Oishi had launched weather balloons from near Mount Fuji and made a startling discovery. His balloons didn't just drift, they raced eastward at incredible speeds, reaching altitudes of 30,000 feet, where winds exceeded 200 miles per hour. He had discovered the jet stream, powerful rivers of air that encircled the planet. Oishi published his findings in Esperanto, an artificial international language meant to reach the widest audience. Instead, it ensured his research remained virtually unknown outside Japan. America had no idea these aerial highways existed. In late 1943, the Imperial Japanese Army's 9th Technical Research Institute began working on Fugo, wind-ship weapon. They consulted meteorologist Hidetoshi Arakawa, who studied Oishi's decades-old data and extrapolated the jet stream patterns across the Pacific. His calculations showed that a balloon maintaining 30,000 to 35,000 feet could reach North America in 30 to 100 hours if launched during winter months when westerly winds were strongest. The engineering challenge was immense. The balloon had to be large enough to carry explosives, strong enough to withstand high-altitude conditions, and sophisticated enough to maintain altitude across an ocean. The design they settled on was revolutionary. A hydrogen-filled balloon 33 feet in diameter, constructed not from rubber, which Japan's war-ravaged supply chains couldn't provide, but from washi paper made from mulberry tree fibers. The sheets were glued together with potato flour paste, creating a material strong enough to contain 19,000 cubic feet of hydrogen gas. Hanging beneath each balloon was a chandelier-like structure carrying a deadly payload. One 33-pound anti-personnel high-explosive bomb and 4 11-pound incendiary devices. The genius lay in the automatic altitude control system, a sophisticated mechanism using sandbags as ballast to maintain flight altitude. The altitude control worked like clockwork. When the balloon climbed above 38,000 feet, a barometric switch would automatically vent hydrogen to prevent it from bursting. When it descended below 30,000 feet during the cold nights over the Pacific, another mechanism would drop pairs of sandbags, reducing weight and allowing the balloon to climb back into the jet stream. This up and down pattern would repeat across the ocean until, after approximately 70 hours of flight, a 64-foot fuse would burn through, triggering the bombs to drop. The final sandbag would release, the balloon would climb one last time, and then a demolition charge would destroy the control mechanism, erasing evidence before it fell. But creating thousands of these weapons required an army of workers. In 7 factories around Tokyo, converted theaters and large arenas, the Japanese military conscripted an unlikely workforce: schoolgirls. Teenagers like 15-year-old Tanaka Tetsuko and roughly 150 classmates from Yamaguchi Girls High School were told they were working on a secret weapon that would fly to America. They weren't told it carried bombs. For months, these young women carefully pasted together the delicate mulberry paper sheets, their meticulous work ensuring the balloons could survive the brutal conditions of high-altitude flight. 3 launch sites were prepared on the coastal region of Honshu, Japan's main island. Each launch required 30 personnel and took half an hour to complete. With favorable weather conditions, several hundred balloons could be sent skyward each day. The operation was scheduled to begin on November 3, 1944, the 92nd birthday of Emperor Meiji, grandfather of the reigning Emperor Showa. It was a symbolic date for what Japan hoped would be a devastating campaign. The strategy had multiple objectives. Primary goal: ignite massive forest fires across the Pacific Northwest during the dry season, forcing America to divert resources from the Pacific War effort to firefighting at home. Secondary objective: spread terror and panic among the civilian population. If Americans knew their mainland was under attack from weapons they couldn't predict or defend against, morale would crumble. On November 2, 1944, the Japanese military launched an unarmed test balloon to check wind conditions. The balloon disappeared over the horizon, carried by the jet stream. Unknown to the Japanese, just 68 miles off the coast of San Pedro, California, on November 4, a U.S. Navy patrol boat spotted something bizarre floating on the ocean's surface. When sailors hauled it aboard, they found a large deflated balloon marked with Japanese characters and the rising sun symbol. The armed launches began as scheduled on November 3, 1944. Over the following months, Japan would release approximately 9,300 balloon bombs into the Pacific jet stream: 700 in November, 1,200 in December, 2,000 in January 1945, 2,500 in February, 2,500 in March, and 400 in April before the program ended. They floated silently across the ocean, invisible against the sky at 30,000 feet, traveling faster than any aircraft of the era. But from the beginning, problems emerged. The wintertime Pacific Northwest was covered in snow and rain. The forests Japan hoped to incinerate were too damp to burn. Most balloons malfunctioned. Their timing mechanisms failed, bombs didn't release, or they simply fell into the ocean. Of the 9,300 launched, experts believe approximately 1,000 reached North America, but only 300 were ever found or documented. The first discoveries puzzled American authorities. On December 6, 1944, workers near Thermopolis, Wyoming, saw a bright red flash 800 miles inland from the Pacific coast, followed by what looked like a parachute descending. They found fragments of a Japanese bomb. The idea that it came directly from Japan seemed impossible. Investigators initially suspected Japanese submarines, German POW camps, or Japanese-American internment camps as the source. As more balloons were found, from Alaska's Aleutian Islands to Arizona's Mexican border, as far east as Michigan, the truth slowly dawned on American military intelligence. These weapons were crossing the entire Pacific Ocean. A special military geology unit led by Sigmund Poole analyzed sand from the ballast bags. The sand composition was unique, not from North America or Hawaii. Using microscopic analysis, geologists traced it to beaches on the southern coast of Honshu, Japan. The impossible had become reality. Small local newspapers began reporting the mysterious balloon discoveries. In early January 1945, Time and Newsweek published brief stories about the strange weapons. But military officials recognized a critical opportunity. If Japan believed the balloon bombs weren't reaching America, they might abandon the program. On January 4, 1945, the U.S. Office of Censorship issued an extraordinary directive to all American press outlets: complete silence about the balloon bombs. No reports, no photographs, no mentions whatsoever. The media blackout was unprecedented and remarkably effective. Newspapers, radio stations, and local reporters complied without exception. American citizens finding balloon debris were quietly told not to discuss it. The information void worked exactly as intended. In Tokyo, Japanese military planners waited for reports from America. Nothing came. Behind the scenes, America mobilized. Over 2,000 military personnel joined efforts to track, recover, and analyze the balloon bombs. The Army's Western Defense Command launched Project Sunset, 24-hour radar surveillance and fighter aircraft patrols along the Pacific coast. When balloons were spotted, planes scrambled to shoot them down. Gun camera footage from April 1945 shows multiple balloons being destroyed over the Aleutian Islands. The Army also prepared for the summer fire season. Operation Firefly deployed specialized firefighting units, including the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, the first all-black parachute unit, nicknamed the Triple Nickels, and later known as the original Smoke Jumpers. Between May and October 1945, they conducted 36 firefighting missions and made 1,200 parachute jumps, ready to combat any fires the balloon bombs might start. Fortunately, the damp conditions meant few fires ever ignited. But there were deeper fears. Some military officials worried the balloons might carry biological weapons or chemical agents. The Lightning Project organized veterinarians, agricultural officers, and 4-H clubs to monitor for unusual crop diseases or livestock illnesses. Intelligence officers studied every recovered balloon fragment, searching for clues about Japanese capabilities. The discoveries were simultaneously impressive and terrifying. Japan had created history's first intercontinental weapon system. By April 1945, Japan's balloon bomb campaign was faltering. The military had little evidence the balloons were causing any damage. The media silence in America suggested complete failure. More critically, Japan was running out of resources. Paper supplies were depleted. Hydrogen production facilities were being destroyed by American B-29 bombers who had specifically targeted the plants after learning of the balloon threat. On April 20, 1945, Japan launched its last balloon bomb. The Fugo program quietly ended. But one balloon, launched perhaps weeks or even months earlier, still hung in the air. It had crossed the Pacific successfully, riding the jet stream over mountains and forests. Somewhere over southern Oregon, its automatic systems failed. Instead of releasing its bombs and self-destructing, the balloon slowly deflated and descended, landing in the remote wilderness of the Fremont National Forest near Gerhardt Mountain. It lay there, hidden among the ponderosa pines, its explosives still armed, waiting. Spring arrived in the small logging town of Bly, Oregon. Population less than 1,000, the community centered around timber work and the local Christian and Missionary Alliance Church. The new pastor, Archie Mitchell, was young and enthusiastic. His wife Elsie, 26 years old and 5 months pregnant with their first child, quickly became beloved by the congregation. That Saturday morning, May 5, 1945, Elsie almost decided to stay home. She hadn't been feeling well with the pregnancy. But the weather was beautiful, warm sunshine breaking through the pine forests, and the children were excited about the picnic. 5 Sunday school students piled into the Mitchells' car. Sherman Shoemaker, 11, Edward Engine, 13, J. Gifford, 13, and siblings Dick Patska, 14, and Joan Patska, 13. Elsie had baked a chocolate cake the night before. They drove up the one-lane gravel road toward Gearhart Mountain, about 13 miles northeast of Bly. When they reached their spot near Leonard Creek, Reverend Mitchell parked and began unloading picnic baskets and fishing rods. Elsie and the children walked ahead, exploring the forested knoll that sloped down toward the creek. The ponderosa pines rose tall around them. Birds sang. It was peaceful. Then one of the children spotted something unusual on the ground among the trees. It looked like a large deflated balloon with metal attachments and ropes. Curious, they gathered around it. "Look what we found," someone called back to Reverend Mitchell. "It looks like some kind of balloon." Mitchell had heard rumors about Japanese balloons. His mind raced. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, "Don't touch it!" The explosion ripped through the forest before his words could reach them. A massive blast, the 33-pound anti-personnel bomb detonating with full force. Sherman Shoemaker, Edward Engine, J. Gifford, and Dick Patska died instantly. Elsie Mitchell and Joan Patska died from their wounds moments later. Army investigators would later conclude someone had likely kicked or tugged at the balloon, triggering the bomb that had lain undisturbed for approximately 1 month. Army Mitchell ran to the scene, his ears ringing from the explosion. He tried desperately to extinguish the flames on his wife's burning dress, burning his own hands in the process. But it was too late. In seconds, everything had changed. His wife was gone. Their unborn child was gone. 5 children who had been laughing and singing in his car minutes earlier were gone. He stood in the scorched forest, alone, as smoke drifted through the pines. Military authorities arrived within hours. Lieutenant Colonel Charles B. Senius from Fort Lewis, Washington, secured the site. Ordnance experts removed the remaining unexploded incendiary bombs. But the officials gave strict orders. The explosion was to be reported in newspapers only as an explosion of undetermined origin. The media blackout remained in effect. The tragedy was announced in Bly, but without explanation. On May 7th, the Klamath Falls Herald and News ran a front-page story. "Blast kills 6, 5 children, pastor's wife in explosion." The article mentioned a fishing trip, but provided no details about the cause. The community was devastated but confused. How had 6 people died? Why wouldn't officials explain? For the families, grief was compounded by the enforced silence. The Patska family lost 2 children, Dick and Joan, out of their 10. Another Patska brother was fighting overseas. Sherman Shoemaker's body was sent to California for burial in a family plot. On May 9, a mass funeral was held in Klamath Falls for the other 4 children. 450 people attended, trying to understand a tragedy they couldn't fully comprehend. But by mid-May 1945, military officials realized the policy had to change. 6 Americans were dead. If more balloons were lying undiscovered in the forests, more people could die. The strategy of silence had succeeded. Japan had stopped the launches. But now public safety demanded transparency. On May 22, 1945, the War Department finally issued a statement confirming the existence of Japanese balloon bombs and warning Americans to report any suspicious balloon-like objects without approaching them. The warning came too late for Elsie Mitchell and the 5 children. But by then, the war was entering its final months. Germany had surrendered on May 8th. The revelation about balloon bombs was overshadowed by the dizzying pace of events in the European theater. Most Americans barely noticed the story. Even today, surveys show the majority of Americans have never heard of the Fugo balloon bombs, despite their historical significance as the first intercontinental ballistic weapon system, predating ICBMs by 12 years. The balloon bomb campaign was ultimately a military failure for Japan. Some reports indicate that only 1 or 2 small grass fires were ever attributed to the balloons. The winter and spring launch window meant forests were too damp to burn. The sophisticated altitude control systems often malfunctioned. Most importantly, the media blackout prevented Japan from knowing their weapons had reached America, leading them to abandon the program. But for one moment in the Oregon wilderness, Fugo succeeded catastrophically. Those 6 deaths, the only American civilians killed by enemy action on the continental United States during World War II, proved that in modern warfare, no place is truly safe. An ocean offers no protection. A peaceful forest can hide deadly threats. The world had grown smaller and more dangerous. In the years following the war, balloon debris continued to surface across North America. As recently as 2014, a technically functional balloon bomb was discovered in Canada. Experts believe not all balloons have been recovered. Some remain hidden in remote wilderness areas, potentially still dangerous 8 decades later. Residents of the Pacific Northwest are advised to be cautious when exploring uncharted territories and to report any suspicious balloon-like debris to authorities without touching it. At the site where Elsie Mitchell and the 5 children died, the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company erected a stone monument in August 1950. The Mitchell Monument stands in what is now called the Mitchell Recreation Area within the Fremont-Wenema National Forest. A bronze plaque lists the victims' names and ages, followed by the solemn words, "Only place on the American continent where death resulted from enemy action during World War II." A nearby ponderosa pine still bears scars on its trunk from the bomb's shrapnel. The aftermath transformed lives in unexpected ways. In 1947, Archie Mitchell married Betty Patska, the older sister of Dick and Joan, 2 of the children who died. Together, they fulfilled Archie and Elsie's dream of becoming overseas missionaries, eventually serving in Vietnam, where Archie was kidnapped by the Viet Cong in 1962 and never seen again. Perhaps the most remarkable legacy emerged decades later. In the late 1980s, a professor learned that the wife of a childhood friend had worked as one of the schoolgirls who built the balloon bombs. This discovery led to an extraordinary reconciliation. The former schoolgirls, now elderly women, began corresponding with the residents of Bly. In 1987, they folded 1,000 paper cranes, a Japanese symbol of peace and healing, and sent them to the victims' families. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the tragedy, some of these Japanese women traveled to Bly to meet face-to-face with the community their teenage hands had unknowingly harmed. They planted 6 cherry trees around the Mitchell Monument, 1 for each victim. Today, 2 of those trees still stand beside the stone memorial, their blossoms a living symbol of reconciliation between former enemies. The Fugo balloon bombs represent one of history's most ingenious yet tragic weapon systems. Scientific brilliance turned toward destruction, teenage labor exploited for war, and innocent lives caught in the crossfire of global conflict. They remain a reminder that in our interconnected world, distance provides no immunity from the consequences of war. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical and documented sources.